What should we say to our children about global warming? Or, if we don't have any of our own, what should we say to young people who look to us for some sort of guidance? It's a suggestive word, guidance, with its implication that there should be some way ahead, discoverable by those with sufficient wisdom. If an older generation can't represent itself as having this wayfinding capacity, the young might reasonably ask of us, what precisely are you for? And given the demographic inversion so many societies are currently undergoing, including our own, the youthful minority may begin to question the value of maintaining such a large, aging, and purblind population. With the benefit of hindsight, it seems bizarre that those of us who grew up in the decades following the Second World War looked to the older generations for such perspicacity. After all, these were men and women who, whatever their personal grit and determination, had nonetheless collectively failed to learn from the blood-soaked lessons of the First War and prevent its rematch. Nor had they managed to forestall the horrifying sequels of the Second War, the Holocaust and the Cold War. Indeed, the history of the 20th century overall seems characterized precisely by humanity stumbling into these killing zones of unprecedented ferocity, whether actual or potential. Be that as it may, while we lions may have occasionally roared at the donkeys leading us, for the most part we curled up and listened dutifully to their braying. The institutions which both incubated and emitted guidance were yet intact, and, for the most part, unsullied by scandal. We looked to the church, the monarchy, academia, the government, even the media, confident that these were vectors fit for the transmission of human purpose through time. Why wouldn't we? True, the world wars of the 20th century were on a far greater scale than previous conflicts, but there was nothing that novel about them. It was still a case of large numbers of youngish men, and a few women, hurling death metal at each other. As for the great superpower face-off that followed the Soviet acquisition of the bomb in 1949 and endured for 4 decades, while this mutually assured destruction did present an existential threat to humanity, it also flattered us with the idea that we could yet control our destiny simply by averting it. No wonder the political scientist Francis Fukuyama announced the end of history when the Berlin Wall fell, for wasn't this precisely the moment when our leaders, together with their advice, were vindicated? But in the decades that have followed, as the grim body count of extinct species rises and the extreme weather events proliferate, and conflicts such as the Syrian civil war, widely considered to be resource-based and triggered by environmental degradation, drag bloodily on, we come to see that the end of history was a sort of narrative detour, like all utopian visions, one that encouraged us to relax into a never-ending present while paying little heed to the future. Of course, there may be some listening who simply don't believe in the predictions of global warming issued by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or, even if you do give them credence, you may reject the evidence that the temperature rises are caused by human activities. Clearly, if this is your view, I cannot influence what you tell your children at all. So I'll confine my ruminations to those of us who recognize both the reality of the threat and its imminence. What will the warmed world of the middle years of this century, one my own 4 children will very likely live to see, be like? Well, it's precisely this imponderable that brings us to the limits of what guidance the older generation can offer. Will the absence of summer ice at the North Pole result in a bonanza of newly extractable resources and such efficient shipping that it offsets the negative impacts of sea level rises? Will the loss of agricultural land in some parts of the world be compensated for by the cultivatable gains in other regions? One thing borne out by recent events is increased unpredictability when it comes to extreme weather and its attendant costs. So it's not hard to understand why there should already be a generalized loss of confidence in authorities of all kinds. When actuaries, those death-driven bean counters, are telling us that the insurance industry will soon be unable to honour our policies, we know the world's turned upside down. At the most fundamental level, all our ideas of human effectiveness are bound up with notions of progress, which in turn rely on growth. Yes, growth, that most healthy and organic sounding of phenomena, which, when the future was assumed to be recognizably like the past, was only ever a good thing, under conditions of environmental degradation becomes malignant, cancerous even. For what are the effluents poisoning the seas, the plastic nurdles choking the fish, and the gases occluding the sun, if not the result of our malignancy? And which is worse, that this behaviour should have been unwitting or uncaring? For the younger generations, it clearly doesn't matter. Both preclude us offering them any remotely useful advice. Guidance cannot surely consist in crude survivalism, such as encouraging your offspring to become trigger-happy bunker dwellers. Even if we set to one side the issue of causation and say to the young, fine, here we are, and there's no point in dwelling on it, let's just consider how to solve the problem, then the very calculus we apply seems itself compromised. Should our actions be collective or individual, generalized or very specifically targeted? Are we all to blame, or only those of us with the good fortune to have been born in the West? Should we concentrate on being the change we want to see in the world, or forcing the big polluters to effect these changes for us? And if it's true that only a substantial contraction in human industry, with the implied reduction in our numbers, can prevent the planet from choking to death on our effluent, then what kind of counsel is this for the young? Don't just do something, sit there. Each valetudinarian generation has a tendency to lament the unwillingness of the young to accord them deference. But it seems to me that in the case of the generations Y through Z, their insubordination is entirely justified. Two things seem incontrovertible about the mounting environmental catastrophe. It's genuinely unprecedented, and we really are all in it together. It's been something of a shibboleth on liberal lips to suggest that since the 1960s, relationships between parents and children have changed, that we've become more like friends than subjects of a patriarchy, or a matriarchy for that matter. Nowadays, we listen to the same music, wear similar clothes, and with the relaxation of religious orthodoxies and their attendant taboos, we're better able to discuss difficult problems. Well, all I can say is, good, because far from being able to advise the young when it comes to this, the most salient feature of their future, it seems to me we're better off all listening to each other. Possibly out of genuine mutuality will emerge some sort of supervening and collective wisdom. One can only hope, because the alternative is frankly terrifying. A degraded, dystopic, and nakedly Darwinian future in which the old and unfit will very definitely be unsustainable.